Welcome to ReligionWise. I'm your host, Chip Gruen. If you have comments, questions that you would like for us to address on this episode or any of our past episodes, you can find us on the web at religionandculture.com, or you can email us directly at religionandculture@muhlenberg.edu. Today's episode is a really interesting one, I think. It features a conversation with Adeel Zeb, who has, among other things, served as a Muslim chaplain at a number of big institutions, including Duke University and the Claremont colleges. He has been profiled in a number of prominent publications, including the Washington Post and Buzzfeed, and his writing has appeared in the Huffington Post, among other outlets. I don't want to talk too much about his career because this is something that we deal with in the conversation itself. But his path is interesting and instructive for a number of reasons. He is a second generation immigrant to the US from Pakistan. And so he faced a little bit of resistance, you'll hear him say, in the beginning from pursuing clerical vocation. But then even that pursuit of the clerical vocation, some doors are more widely open than others. And so we talk a little bit about the structures that lead to becoming an imam and serving in a Muslim community, and how that is similar to and different from serving as a Muslim chaplain at a university.
Of course, the context for this conversation is early 2024. And one thing that I've been thinking about as we pursue other programming through the Institute, in particular, very recently we hosted an event in which a community member from the local Muslim community came and talked about wearing the hijab. And as I was preparing for that event and thinking about it in this context, chronological context in which we live, I was thinking about the distinction between the larger global concerns. At this particular moment, Israel and Gaza, of course, but just the place of each religious community in the imagined global world, right? So the place of Islam in the world, the place of Judaism in the world, the place of Christianity or Hinduism, right? We have these big conversations or these big understandings of how these quote unquote world religions function in their own communities, in relation to other communities. Like that's one way of having the conversation. Yet, in the end, I kept coming back to the thought that that larger conversation is not unrelated to, but is not the entire lens for understanding a particular religious community in a particular local context. So for this example, thinking about Muslim women wearing the hijab here in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania is not best understood through the context of that giant global conversation of the place of Islam in the world. The comparison that I keep coming back to in my head, which is not a perfect comparison by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe one that's helpful, is if we go back to times of conflict in Ireland and Northern Ireland between Catholic and Protestant communities. It was horrible, right? That the Troubles, as they were known, were disruptive and violent and catastrophic for multiple communities. Yet, I don't feel as if the global conversation between Protestants and Catholics were filtered through that conflict. It did not become impossible for Catholics and Protestants to talk to one another in the United States because of the events in Ireland. Now, certainly there was disagreement, and certainly that disagreement got heated at certain times, at certain places in domestic American politics and social life. But it was not the only conversation in town. And I wonder, maybe not what has changed, but how is the situation different that the conversation about local Jewish and Muslim communities and between those communities necessarily gets filtered through this very difficult situation that the world is confronting in Israel and Gaza. Again, not a perfect comparison, right? That there are certainly ways in which Israel is a different geography and Palestine is a different geography than Ireland is. But what ReligionWise is really interested in doing is thinking about how we think about religion. And I think at this particular moment, we're seeing that people are imagining those religious and ethnic and cultural identities in different ways and putting different stresses on them, even in their local community, than maybe we've seen in other situations. And again, that's not what this entire conversation is about today. But for a chaplain working in a university, as Adeel has, thinking about similarity and dissimilarity and harmony and conflict among various student groups maybe requires a little bit more, certainly requires more empathy and compassion towards their own perspectives of themselves and their communities, but also deserves good, analytical, empathetic thought about how best to have conversations.
In talking to Adeel, he has a lot to say in his work as a chaplain about the role and place of minoritized religious community on a college campus, about what similarities there are between a Jewish community in a predominantly Christian campus like at Duke, and what that looks like now when you have a Muslim minority that is put in a very similar structural position. So his habit of mind is one to see social similarities there rather than imagine ideological difference. And I think that that's a really instructive perspective to have, and something to think about when we have this very polarized conversation in the world right now. I don't want to step on the conversation too much and anticipate it, but I think his observations about similarities of Jewish minority a generation ago and a Muslim minority now are something that we should all think about and all consider as we think about social structures or social placement of religious communities in our public and quasi-public institutions. So without further ado, here's the conversation between Adeel Zeb and myself. I hope you enjoy it. Adeel Zeb, thanks for being on ReligionWise.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Chip.
So I want to start our conversation by asking you about your career trajectory. You were born in New Jersey, the son of Pakistani immigrants, then spent much of your childhood and early adulthood in Texas. Can you talk about what looks to me from looking at the way that you've talked about it and from your CV, can you talk about that relatively bumpy path towards becoming an imam?
Yeah, sure. I don't think it's every migrant parent's dream that their child goes into spiritual leadership. I think they're usually more engineered, pun intended, towards engineering, towards medicine, towards the law, these types of vocations and professions. And I think for me, even um, until I was in college, rather, had a religious spiritual awakening, where I went to Mecca to perform a mini pilgrimage called Umrah, not the Hajj, but like a mini Hajj, you could say. And that's where I touched the Kaaba, the house of God, and I just had a spiritual awakening. And I wanted to go and study Islam in a foreign land, like something mystical. But 9/11 also happened concurrently. And so I was in the largest Baptist university in the world in rural Texas, and 9/11 is happening, and I'm a brown man and son of migrants and Muslim, and it's a very precarious situation to be in at best. And so I wanted to, again, study Islam and just learn more, closer to God, I guess. And then my dad was like, we don't know how Muslims are going to be treated in this country. So it's better you get a degree you can get a job in. And then after that, you can study Islam the rest of your life. Right. And effectively, that's what kind of happened. I finished my business degree at Baylor. And then I studied at what you'll be equivalent of modern Orthodox, if you're like Jewish equivalent to modern Orthodox Islamic Institute, very traditional. But the imam who was the main teacher there, he wanted us to learn in America. He said it's less proficient when you have to leave America for 10 years and then come back to the States I have to relearn how do I apply that knowledge from over there over here. It makes more sense to learn and practice where you are living, right? That was his logic, right? It was a 4-year program there. It was based out in Houston. And then after that program, I went to Hartford Seminary, and that's where I learned more social sciences and religion, more counseling, more interfaith relations. And on that path, led an Umrah trip myself, which was a pretty fun experience with like 70 people, 70 college students behind me with 3 other leaders. I went to study the pains and the ethics of what happened during the Holocaust as a fellowship in Poland and Germany. Got to study Islam in Turkey and Oman as well, and as well as some interfaith relations in Oman and intrafaith as well in Oman. And so I really kind of, it was all part of building myself to meet the community needs, right? And then currently I'm a PhD student, and my studies are in comparative religion and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and focusing on some of the Islamic elements as well attached to that. I think professionally, right, it was, as you mentioned, a little bit of an arduous journey in that I started out managing a medical clinic, and that was very mundane. And then I went into Muslim civil rights, defending civil rights for Muslims. And then I had a couple of years working at congressional offices as a staffer there. And that's when I started to kind of figure this out, right? I do like working with young professionals and young people and getting them motivated spiritually, and building those interfaith relations. And that's how I got into chaplaincy. And so 12 years later, I've been working as a chaplain, college chaplain, until recently. I'm more part-time with that kind of work, and more full-time studying.
So I want to kind of point out, the line of your CV that's missing a little bit,
Yeah.
that you've not been an imam within a community mosque setting. You've
Yeah.
always been in these,
Always bounced.
public or quasi-public institutions.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our listeners will be more familiar with the Christian model of seminary training,
Mhm.
right, where a lot of times there is a connection between the educational institution and the placement, the vocational placement, the calling, as they would say. But there's not really an exact parallel. I mean, you described the place that you went in Houston, but there's not really an exact parallel for training to become, an imam in the U.S.
Right.
Can you talk about traditional requirements for serving in a community? I mean, what does it take to be an imam in a mosque community generally, and then how does that translate into the American context?
Yeah. So generally speaking, it's a beautiful question, and it's a multi-tiered, I think, multivalent answer. To be an imam, generally speaking, or be a sheikha for a female, but one is to have a certain level of Islamic knowledge, right? So learning certain Islamic sciences, certain level of Arabic competence, certain level of Quranic knowledge and memorization, certain Islamic knowledges, right? And just knowledge in general of Islam. Two is the community approval, right? Community has to be like, we want this guy to be our leader, right? Almost like a democracy in a way. Number three is they have to live a life of a Muslim role model, right? Meaning that, so say there's like minor sins and major sins. Minor sin is Joe punches Jack in the face. Major sin is Joe kills Jack. So the imam should not be doing major sins, right? And continuously doing major sins, should be good kind of ethical, moral person and living that kind of a moral lifestyle. Those are kind of the three requirements you could say are pretty universal that would kind of cross globally. If you're in a Muslim majority land, you have, generally speaking, a joining of mosque and state, if you like, right? Mm-hmm. And so there within the governmental framework, there is a department or Ministry of Islamic Affairs or Ministry of Religious Affairs. So the government is the one who is subsidizing the mosque. They are subsidizing the employees in the mosque. They are training the imams, which are learning from government Islamic universities, institutions. Right? So everything is government. Even the Friday sermons, they're coming out, and as opposed to Sunday, right? The Friday sermons, you'll find in some Muslim majority countries, if not many, one PDF. that is sent throughout the entire country, and everybody is saying the exact same words, right?
Mm.
That level of monitoring, right, and structure. So, but the role of the spiritual leader or imam or sheikha if it's a female, but the role of an imam is to lead the prayers, is to teach people Quran, give Islamic lectures, give the Friday service, lead funeral prayers, keep people married. That's pretty much the limits of the and expectations of the community, right? But when you translate that into America, then the Protestant model starts to overtake the Muslim community and the Jewish community and a lot of other. So it's not just like religious focus anymore. Now there's an interfaith relations component. Now there's a pastoral counseling or chaplaincy component. People are coming in, talking about their life, give us advice, right? So that's another kind of training, right? Then how do you explain your religion with all other religions, especially when you're operating as a minority, a faith minority, and you're operating as a racialized minority, at least post 9/11, if not before that as well, right? The other complexity is that in Muslim majority lands, you will find a vast ethnic majority, right? If you look at Turkey, most people are Turkish. You have a small community of other people, but most are Turkish. In Saudi Arabia, most so the level of knowledge for that region can work with that region. When you come to the States, because everybody migrated or is migrating to the United States, you're having to learn a multivalent versions of Islam with S, right? Or Islam's, right? How is Islam practiced in South
Mm.
Africa? How is Islam practiced in India, in Arabia, in Ethiopia? And that's the only Islam they know. So when they come to you and you offer them a Pakistani answer and they're from Ethiopia, they're going to be, this guy's what he's talking about, right? That's what makes the job so much more difficult because now you're having to work on a more global level, right? And that's why I think my early training with my imam was very important because he taught us a comparative approach to Islamic jurisprudence because he knew you're in America and you're going to get people from all over the world coming to you. So you have to be able to know how to pivot and understand where they're coming from, right? I think another complexity is you're having to be a youth director, or how do you engage the youth, get the youth kind of motivated about spirituality, young professionals, young families, senior care. So the expectations for programming are also there, and there's so much more than you would expect in Muslim majority lands, right? Now, yet another complexity is the intelligentsia, right? All of these, people coming with Ivy League degrees, liberal arts degrees, and these higher education institutions, and they want an Islam that is also going to stimulate them intellectually, right? We want to be able, on our minds and our spirits, to be hit simultaneously, and our hearts. So three-tier, trifecta. And so it's a very difficult position, right? And I think it's impossible for one person to do. I think you have to have a team, right? And there are just some things that are so embedded in people's praxis that it's difficult for them to accept, right? So, for example, if you have a students coming from a heavy Ethiopian, which is and black mosque, right, and they come into college, and then the chaplain there is brown or is white, right, or is blue, whatever. It's hard for them to feel welcome there because they're so used to having that black majority, black culture, black imam. But now they walk in. Now, well, wait a minute, right? Is this? Am I still welcome here? So you have to kind of fill in that with more and more staff. I think those are some of the differences between, in America.
Yeah. So, and I mean, and this is something as I was preparing for the interview and I was thinking about it, and you can just tell me, Chip, you've got this one totally wrong. But it also seems, and how I read, your activity in, these quasi public institutions,
Yeah.
universities, et cetera, that it seems to me that there is a proclivity for community-centered mosques to be pretty conservative.
Mm.
That the funding for the mosque ends up
running towards a more traditional form
Yeah.
of Islam than what we might expect from, say, second generation or more enculturated,
Yeah.
Muslims in the country.
Yeah. So that kind of and I don't think it's too different than some church groups and some Jewish synagogues or other Jewish groups in that, it's almost like our places of worship have become like the platinum card access. Like you have to meet this certain level credit score, if you like, religious credit score, right, to get access to the card. And once you get you have to pay a certain fee per year, and then you can get into the lounge, right? And I think that's what we've created in our spiritual groups. You have to pray 5 times a day. If you're Jewish, pay 3 times a day. If you're Christian, you have to go to church, mass multiple times a week, church on Sunday. And if you don't like that, then you get judged, right? Or there is a stigma that before you walk in, you're going to be judged, right? And so that does happen. And so the solutions have been, college is easy if you have a really kind of welcoming and opening environment there. Hopefully, if you have a chaplain there, they're welcome, open to receive people from all backgrounds. But a solution now has been some people are opening up what they call third spaces or fourth spaces, where it's not the church, it's not your home, but it's like another kind of space. And it's a little bit above a community center. It's a little bit more of like a spiritual community center where it's more relaxed feeling and you can just come as you are, and it's not this kind of dress code and spiritual code you have to abide by to get access and to stay in the mosque or the church or the synagogue. So that does happen. And I think, like, for me, it's important to go back to my own tradition, right? Historically, and traditionally, and say, okay, what are examples of the Prophet Muhammad SAW welcoming people to come in to the mosque, right? From all backgrounds. There was one person, he came in and he started peeing in the mosque, right? And the Prophet's companions were about to just, well, are about to handle him pretty good, but what are you doing? And the Prophet was like, no, wait, let him finish. If you stop him now, he's going to spray everywhere. So let him finish. We'll talk to him. We'll educate him. He doesn't understand how this world works, what a mosque is, right? And so I think that's kind of how we have to kind of open up our hearts a bit more. There is another story quickly about a companion named Abdullah, and he was Muslim, and he was suffering with alcoholism, and he kept drinking, and then his companions kept trying to discipline him and this, and then finally they got really mad at him, and Prophet Muhammad said, no, don't you know that he loves Allah and his messenger? Don't help the devil against your brother, right? And so I think that is kind of philosophy we have to have with people when they're coming to the mosque and to our centers. But yes, I mean, you're right. They do generally lean conservative, and there is a certain kind of style you have to have, and a walk you have to have, and a dress you have to have, generally speaking. There are some exceptions, but that is the general. And I think it also permeates into the college campuses as well.
Yeah. If I think about somebody in your situation where you're dealing with, people who are fully culturally American, yet have this, Muslim identity at the same time, who might be more accepting of, more progressive causes or sexual practice or whatever the case may be, right? So that you can sort of start to see the hints of kind of Protestant Reformed tradition Islam. And you are clearly very popular with that set, right? So it's interesting to me sort of thinking about this trajectory of this moving target of kind of those, those very strong forces that I think will only be resolved with time.
Yeah, I think I have to constantly operate in a Venn diagram lifestyle, right? Where I can't be so reform and liberal that I leave this conservative groups, right? And I also can't be so conservative that I take off the liberal. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you're a spiritual leader. You have a flock of sheep, so you can't go too fast. Where some of the flock are like they can't keep up, but also you can't be so slow that they need to get their food and get their water, so they move a little bit more to the next range. You know, that's
Yeah.
kind of how I operate. So I go to very conservative imam meetings. You know, everybody's very very strong, intense. You know, then I also go to like other meetings and they're very liberal, and I'm trying to help them too. And I think that's the real work. You have to be
Yeah.
fluid enough to dance in every ballroom or most ballrooms, you know. And some maybe you can't because it's just too much to, um, if someone comes and says like Michael Jackson is the final prophet of Islam, and that's the new Michael Jackson Muslim group, and I can't be okay. I'm going to go to their meeting. That's just too much for me to handle, you know. Uh, I won't stop them. I won't be like it's their
Right.
right. So there's like limits I have myself, but I think it's important for me to be able to go to different groups like that. And I understand. I think a lot of that zeal happens because we haven't forgiven ourselves yet for who we
Mm.
were. And so that anger towards ourselves projects to others because we still haven't forgiven ourselves for our
Mm.
past lives, so to speak, transgressors.
I don't know. This is just my experience, but going and visiting local mosque community, and which has been very, very open
Mm.
towards the work of the institute, and I really appreciated their partnership. But I remember sitting at one of these open houses that they had, and sitting, and they're very big into sharing food, and and having a very convivial atmosphere, and looking around, and as you describe, having they had people from all kinds of different countries of origin, would bring their food. So this was the Pakistani food over
Yeah,
here, and this was the
yeah.
Egyptian food over here, and this was the Turkish food over here, and just looking around at the sort of the United Nationsness of that all of these different people coming and recognizing and holding on to both that country of origin culture, and then clearly coming together in the
Mm.
United States and being a part of this culture too. And just personally, I am, depending on which side you count, third or fourth generation German American.
Mm.
And I remember, when I was a kid, learning German songs and singing German,
Wow.
and eating German food and so forth. And then my parents and grandparents, like it wasn't that far back till that German was the language of in the household, right?
Mhm.
And so, from my perspective, seeing that sort of what happens in the second generation, what happens in the third generation, what happens in the fourth generation. And I looked around at this experience at the mosque, and I said, I'm really kind of envious of this, right? That there is a way in which the traditionalness of holding on to those divergent cultures was
Yeah.
really kind of moving to me. And then as I thought about it more, I thought, is this what my grandparents' experience was, right? And if I fast forward 2 generations in this community, will it look a whole lot more like a German Lutheran church does, in 2024? And so I've just been thinking a little bit about sort of that assimilation model versus the conservative. And of course, the conservative model holds on to conservative values from the old
Yeah.
country too. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Beautiful summary too. Reflections. I think like there's so I think the first batch coming in, right? Let's say they take one family. The first batch coming in from the family, they're not trying to preserve culture. That culture is them. They're just being them, right?
Mhm.
You can take the person out of the Maldives, but you can't take the Maldives out of the person. They're still, from the Maldives. The way that they think, the way that they eat, it'll adjust a little bit, but the core is definitely there, right? And then I think once they arrive and they see, whoa, I'm a religious minority, and I'm a cultural minority, and I'm a racial minority, and now they become more protective,
Mhm.
right? And so I remember taking a class on counseling Arabs and Muslims when I was in master's program, and talk about the anxiety level increases, right? Because now they have to protect. If they were like, oh, don't worry, sweetie, come back home at 10 p.m. Now they're like 7 p.m. be home because they're so scared of now you're going to become like them and we're going to lose ourselves, identity, our culture, and so forth. But I think what gets lost is that the tip of the iceberg remains, but the core is lost. The bottom part of the iceberg is lost, right? So, you'll have like music, you'll have clothes, you'll have food, that anybody could learn, right? Anybody could learn how to dress. Like I could wear a German dress, right? I could learn how to cook German food. I'm not that good, but I can learn how to do it, right? I can listen to German music, start dancing. I can learn German, right? But I can't learn the very potent elements of German culture. Maybe it's hospitality. Maybe there's certain how do you treat your guests, your neighbors, your family member. There's certain elements of a culture that they're so embedded within it, but once you leave, they're hard to retain,
Mm.
right? And I think that's the fear. It's part of the fear. And then again, like you're talking about people at the mosque, right? Most people in Egypt were Egyptian, and so when they come here, I was like, whoa. And so that translates even within the same religion. It's like, am I okay with my son or daughter marrying an Egyptian person? Are they okay with marrying, an African American? Are they okay with marrying a white? Like, it's probably going to happen, but they never even, I think, consider that's going to happen, you know? And then school systems also, like, they're starting to change too now, and so I spend time kind of bouncing around the country. So I have friends in Texas and California and whatever else. And so in Texas, they have, a focus on stopping DEI initiatives and trying to erase some racial histories and having more Christianity in the school systems. And in California, they're pushing for more gender and sexual inclusivity in the school systems. And so that also becomes a culture shock because it's like, well, wait a minute, like this is not our culture. This is a different way of looking at it. And so I don't know. It's very complicated, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I always say to our constituency, though, is there's no shame in saying it's complicated.
Yeah.
So thinking about that diversity piece, and obviously that is really, an
Yeah.
important public discursive moment right now for thinking about the diversity piece.
Yeah.
There's something, and I think active listeners will have noticed this from you already, that when you've done some comparisons, and we'll talk more about some of that chaplain's work here in a minute, but when you've done some comparisons in your chaplaincy, that you've right away gone to the comparison with Judaism, right? With Jewish,
Yeah.
that how this presents itself in Islam is not so different than how it presents itself
Yeah.
in Judaism. And I think on the surface, I think that people might be like, oh, well, that's very different. Like, why would you do that? But you think about it a little bit more carefully, and it starts to make sense, right? So
Yeah.
can you talk about the affinity or the similarity, whether it be socially, whether it be the minoritized status, whether it
Yeah.
be the orthopraxic? Can you talk
Yeah.
about the similarity of those concerns and how you've noticed it in your chaplaincy work?
Yeah. So, yes, very much so. So in my master's paper, final paper, I studied the Hillel and Chabad models of Jewish chaplaincy and compared those, maybe juxtaposed with the Muslim Student Association and Muslim chaplaincy today. And it was like a past, present, and future analysis, right? And so the Jewish chaplains have been here for about a century, right? About 100 years or so, and very similar objectives, both intra-faith within the Jewish community and also, I think, interfaith with the Muslim community, right? And the founder of Hillel, the rabbi who founded Hillel, said the Jewish college student, when they come to college, they put their head into the sand like an ostrich between their legs, right? And they're just so shy, and they lack confidence in their Judaism and their Jewishness, right? And I think that mirrors a lot of the experience that Muslim college students have today, right? There's just very much scared, ashamed, in a way, fear that it will decrease their social utility, right? They will descend, not ascend, by saying, "Oh, I am Muslim." Oh, well, negative point. So, and that's a similarity, but like a time travel similarity, right? I did notice that Jewish and Muslim college students, they both want to focus less on exclusivity and more on inclusivity, less racist and more inclusive than their predecessors, the generations. What's also fascinating was that Muslim college students and the parents of current Jewish college students had a couple of similarities themselves. The Muslim students now, and then the parents of the Jewish students had similarities in that the Muslim students wanted to have halal food, which is like, like blessed food and drained a certain way before before slaughtering, and they also wanted to have centers for Muslim life or a Muslim house or something on campus. And the Jewish counterparts, the parents of the Jewish students, also wanted to have kosher food, and they were big on Jewish centers. And so we see on many college campuses today in the States have Jewish centers, and they're pushing to have, not everyone, but pushing to have kosher food as well. So I think as a minoritized community, you have to the system that systemically it's very similar, right? You have a halakhic way of life, right? And you have like a Sharia way of life, not some scary Sharia law ban thing, but like a meaning holistic kind of spiritual life. And you have two groups that are minorities within a majority Christian country, and then you have like a shared history, right? So uh, some things are happier, some were sadder together with Muslims and Jews, but they've been minority situations before where they've kind of suffered, and so it's almost like a shared, like a shared generational trauma, but an interfaith shared trauma. Like specifically, I'm thinking about the Inquisition that happened in what is now Spain by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, and so when they're operating in similar ways. Even the way that the rabbis are ordained and the imams are ordained, it's a very, very similar concept, And if you look at, if you even watch there was a dating, there's a marriage show called Jewish Matchmaker on Netflix, and there is a modern Orthodox or Orthodox Jewish family and a couple, and they're courting, right? You could literally put Muslim there and a Muslim girl and a Muslim guy there and a Muslim mom there, and it would be almost the same thing, almost exactly the same thing. It's mind blowing, right? So there's a lot of similarities. I think both in the jurisprudential form, there are similarities in how the theology becomes a theopraxy, and there's similarities in being a fearful minority, both on campus and also in general, especially right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, that fear, just there's a story that you tell in some of your work that's out there that I just want to call out to just sort of illustrate that point.
Yeah.
That while you were serving as Muslim chaplain at Duke,
Yeah.
there had been an initiative to make Muslim students feel more welcome by integrating the call to prayer more fully into the religious and spiritual life of the college, and that didn't go so well. Could you describe that story and your reaction to it and how it fits into this model that you're presenting?
Yeah. So what happened was, is I was at Duke, I was working at Duke University as Muslim chaplain there and director of Muslim life, and the chapel at Duke, which is like the heart of the campus, really, the symbol of campus, the heart of the campus. Their senior staff invited us to do the Muslim call to prayer, which is called the Adhan, at the chapel bell tower on Duke's campus. And everything was going really well. The problem happened when they had a press release. And when that press release was released, Reverend Franklin Graham, who's Reverend Billy Graham's son, very famous preacher, also in North Carolina, Franklin Graham is, or it was at least at the time. And Fox News had a joint ultimatum that if you're an alumni and or donor to Duke, call Duke and tell them to cancel the call to prayer or we'll take our money away. So then Duke got inundated with, phone calls in the law school and the basketball team, and it was all these kinds of problems. And it was a big media mess, right? And all the media, I mean, I'm talking about Pakistan, London, CNN, everybody was just talking about this issue. So we were getting death threats at our office. Something like, we heard you doing the call to prayer from the chapel bell tower over my dead effing body. You know what I mean? And I can't wait, you know? and we had police kind of camped out at our center for Muslim life, and we had a police car camped out. We had the police kind of circulating the area and patrolling the area. So it was a very, very stressful time, and it was kind of like I have to find a way to calm my staff and my students down, right? I have to find a way to work with senior Duke administration to how we can handle the situation, and then ultimately, how do we message out to the media that hey, like we're going to change our minds? It's kind of something on a reverse decision, or so that it kind of calms down. No one loses their mind, and there is some kind of terrorist attack on us. So we ended up having to do like a solidarity event. A lot of non-Muslims came on campus. Someone did like the "Stand by Me" song. It was kind of cute. But we were operating inside the chapel. We never even came outside because it was too dangerous. Some sniper, right? But then after that, it was okay for a few weeks, and then a few weeks later, two Muslim students from UNC, three Muslims from UNC and Chapel Hill were shot in the head at their homes, and so then it became another kind of issue of okay, how are we going to heal my own students who have like a transference now that could have been us 3 weeks ago. Also, trying to help those students pro bono because they don't have a chaplain at UNC because it's a public school. So going over there, having lunch with their students, trying to calm them down, calm my own students down, and then my own kind of mental and emotional health after going through that crazy month, right? Yeah, it was it was a tough time, right? And I think nowadays the student, that was kind of one, so kind of multiple horror stories. First one was I think 9/11 during college. This one was during Duke, and then now there's a lot of problems happening because of the war in Israel and Gaza.
Yeah. So I want to pick up. We'll return to this place, but you mentioned solidarity and receiving these messages of solidarity from other groups on campus, and when you're looking at affinity groups or minoritized groups, that there is oftentimes, I think, an expectation of that solidarity, or what is often referred to now as allyship among these different groups. And one of the places where you see this a lot is on issues of gender and sexual diversity on college campuses. And this is obviously another one of the big hot button culture war issues that, is sort of being amplified by some of the news outlets. And I wonder, on the one hand, that you have sometimes relatively first or second generation Muslim students who are a part of your organization. On the other hand, this expectation of allyship, this has to cause friction, right? I mean, that allyship is not always natural, particularly when you can have a minoritized group that nonetheless might be extremely conservative in its social views.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does cause some tensions, and it raises some questions, right? You cannot work in liberal arts colleges for 12 years, and you cannot study at a liberal arts college or university without asking questions on almost anything in your life, right? And so I think a question arises. So sexual and gender diversity has been there for many, 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 many years, right? It has manifested in different ways as well throughout the world. But the identity, this LGBTQIA plus identity, that is a newer construct, right? And it is a very Western construct. And so for example, to label someone as trans, and in their country, they don't call it trans. That in itself is kind of colonization that makes sense, right? Because they also don't call themselves that. They have a different name for what they experience, right? So what I mean by that is I think that it's a far nuanced conversation that has to happen. I think having this paintbrush like, oh, this is bad or this is good. I think that's uninformed. And it's not going to come across any way receptive, right? There has to be a very nuanced conversation about what we're talking about with sexual ethics and gender diversity. Whatever faith background we come from, it has to be a very nuanced and very compassionate and very inclusive response to how we approach these topics. But yes, it does cause a lot of friction, I think, a lot of times because we're programmed to think that way. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of it is also hot button issues become hot button issues because they don't they don't pertain to us, right? But us meaning people who are in the power, right? So, for example, abortion is a big hot button issue, right? If I'm a straight, white, rich Christian man, I can make abortion a big issue because I never have to have a baby inside of me, right? Generally speaking, okay? I can make LGBTQ an issue because I don't like people of the same sexual identity, right? But I'm not making having affairs with my partner an issue because I'm doing that. Even though biblically it's a sin, religiously it's a sin to cheat on my spouse because I'm cheating with 10 other girls, I'm not making that an issue because I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's easy to focus on another person who is going through that as opposed to examining myself and trying to, work on myself.
So, and I think the listener will hear that you have been in this kind of very, I mean, more traditional kind of chaplaincy role, for
Yeah.
the last decade, a little bit plus, and now your work in more recent times
Yeah.
has really pushed towards these sorts of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm curious as to whether you see that as a shift. Do you see that as a change,
Hmm.
or do you see that as a logical outgrowth of what you've been doing all the way along?
Probably both. Yeah. But I don't think, I think it's a combination, right? So I think it is a combination of experiential learning through chaplaincy, right? Like, for example, I'm studying Quran, I'm studying this, that, and this, but until I have a lesbian Muslim international student in my office talking to me about how she wants to kill herself because of her confusion about her identities converging, right? Now I've reached a higher level of in my position. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because now I'm really having to do hard work. If somebody comes in to me and says, "Can I eat McDonald's? Is it halal or not?" This is a very low level. When I have a student of mine who's a migrant who is gay and who is uh, having suicidal ideations and attempts, now my ministry is at a higher level, right? Because it's more difficult and it's more nuanced and it's more precious. So now I have to figure out ways that can help this person get them to a healthier spiritual and emotional and physical place, right? And then I think in my studies, right, studying all these classes, studying LGBTQ, studying feminism, studying decolonization, studying disability studies, I become far more aware of what people are going through academically, research wise, studies wise, what's going on. Having classmates who are going through all these issues, right? Then my ministry enhances as well. So I think it is a change, and I think it is an upgrade, right? Because now I'm able to minister to those more proficiently than I wouldn't have if I just went straight to a traditional route for a longer period of time.
So I want to, we've talked a lot about sort of these roles on the college campus, but another big part of your life, and you can tell me if you agree with my assessment of this, but another big part of your life has been that you have, been featured in major publications like the
Mm.
Washington Post and Buzzfeed, the Associated Press. You've published several pieces in the Huffington Post, been a guest speaker at governmental functions like President Obama's Interfaith Summit. Like,
Yeah.
there's clearly a desire here, right, to share, right, to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, a public Muslim intellectual of some kind, right, to be a part of that conversation. What do you feel that your role is in the public conversation on religion and religious diversity? How have you found that conversation and how have you contributed to it?
Yeah, I think one thing in one of my senior chaplains had told me when I first when I, not first when I, my earlier jobs, she had mentioned that the people who are really good at this field are the ones who can come into a situation and make it a better one, who can come in and have compassion and just elevate the grace, the compassion, the character, the morality, the ethics of whatever environment they're in, right? And I think that's the role of spiritual leaders, right? Is how do you make a situation a better one, right? You say you have this problem on campus, these groups aren't meeting, it's not happening. Okay, well, how can we make these people meet? Or is another option that they can meet, right? Is there some way we can find some way to have some kind of common ground and come together and have dialogue, right? Because I think that's really important, because when we become too stagnant and there's no dialogue, there's no exchanging of ideas, no understanding, then it's hard to have peace around us, right? And so I think just having grown up the way that I did, and even some things you don't know on my resume, but I did go to a lot of Christian schools when I was younger. I went to a kindergarten that was Catholic, eighth grade that was Pentecostal. Baylor, was Baptist, and I worked at different Methodist schools, and so I've seen a lot, right, of even Christian diversity. And I think really finding that compassion and that love, and how we can come together is so important, at all times, as much as we can.
And you see that then not only sitting with somebody in your office, but you see that as being exhibited through that role in, public presentation or even in print.
Yeah, because okay, so it's almost like when we were growing up, even before 9/11, our representation, our meaning Muslim representation, our meaning brown Muslim man representation, was pretty bad. Like, it was pretty bogus, right? Even movies like Back to the Future, right? You see the opening scene, the Libyans, and they're coming and they're shooting down Doc Brown. It's the again and again, and then the first iteration of Aladdin that came out, Disney's Aladdin, with the Arabian Nights intro song. The first iteration of that song was, "Where we cut off your hands if we don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. Arabian Nights." So there's so much depiction, even way before 9/11, of Muslims being these horrible, especially the men being horrible people and the women being these victims. And that was kind of the impetus for colonization, was to free the women and give them Islam and so forth. But that's another kind of topic. But I think it's very important for Muslims to have positive representation in the media as much as possible, to count as much as we can of what's happened before. Now, having said that, it's gotten a lot better. If you notice the trend of depictions of Muslims being in these terrorist roles, young Muslim men being in terrorist roles, has decreased a lot. You'll see the Muslim men and women being superheroes now in the Marvel and DC universe, and so it's trending in a positive direction. But yeah, it's been a lot of work.
Yeah. So speaking of work, I want to just finish up, and we're sort of reaching near the end of our time. And goodness knows there are lots of other conversations we could have talked about over the course of things that you've encountered in your career. But there is one of these articles I mentioned earlier that was in Buzzfeed, and it quoted one of your students. And the student said, and just I want you to react to this just as a way of kind of conclusion. Adeel's voice, so there's a quotation, begin quote, "Adeel's voice is important because the most important thing we can do right now is assert ourselves as Americans. A lot of us are second generation, and we're no less American than someone who's Christian. We need to own the fact that we are Americans," close quote. I wonder how is this a moving target? How is this different than 20 years ago? I mean, you talked about the kinds of unfortunate signposts that we've had, whether it be 9/11 or more recent contemporary events. Tell me a little bit about your students and American identity and Islam generally, and American identity, because we can pay lip service to it that, of course, there's no religious identity test to be an American citizen.
Yeah.
But I think in popular discourse, this is a hard one for some people to get their heads around.
Yeah. And I think it's from a meta level, right? We're thinking about Islam in the West, right? And Islam is a religion, and West is as a direction, right? But or a way of life and a direction. But I think when we look at Muslim majority lands, like I mentioned before, there is mosque and state, if you like, they are married in Muslim majority lands. Most, you could say most or many. And so it's very difficult for people to separate their culture and their Islam in those lands. Just like it's hard to separate chocolate milk once you've missed the Nesquik with the almond milk or the oat milk, whatever. Once it's gotten in, it's hard to take it out, right? And I think that's where the generation that come after the migraine generation, they're the ones who can think critically, right? And they need some help thinking critically, right? And I think that's where chaplains kind of come in and say, okay, hey, listen, that's a cultural practice, but it's not an Islamic practice, right? That's a political practice of a region, but it's not an Islamic practice. And I think that's probably where the student is coming from, is that you're trying to find a way to extract the Nesquik from the milk. But they can't do it because that's what they grew up with.
Yeah. It's an interesting quote to me, too, because she says, on the one hand, we need to assert ourselves as Americans, which is like convincing everybody else, right?
Yeah.
And then at the end, she says, we need to own the fact that we are Americans, which is like an internal dialogue.
Yeah.
Right. So that you've got both of those things going on, and both, at least from the student's perspective, seem to be, part of the struggle.
Definitely. And it's you can't escape it, right? It's like everybody asks you, where are you from? They ask you within the Muslim community and then externally as well. So where are you from? Bro, I'm from New Jersey.
Right.
Okay. So, but they're not going to go. That won't work, right? If I had blonde hair and blue eyes, okay, cool. What part? Jersey Shore, fist pumping, like where, and it's not going to fly. They want to know like what you have to give some other country of origin. Otherwise, I'm not going to keep investigating you. And so I think that's part of that internalization that student was kind of talking about, was like a certain, no, I am American. And then also thinking about, yes, I am also American. So also always even catch yourself saying, oh yeah, I'm Pakistani. No, are you really Pakistani? Or right? And then, if I ever go to Pakistan, then it's like, whoa, I'm so different from these people. This is great. This is bananas, right? But then also in America, there's times where I'm just like, well, I'm so different. But then also I'm like, well, am I different because I'm more practicing Muslim? If I wasn't as practicing, how different would I be? And so it's complicated, right? Then when the call of prayer thing was happening, that was a big question, right? Like, is America a Christian country? And then is Duke a Christian school? And then going in deeper, is the chapel only for Christians? Right. And so those are questions that we have to in a healthy manner ask ourselves. Right. When we ask the question, like there is this philosophy of a separation of church and state, right? In the States. Why is it called church and state? Not religious center or spiritual center. Already the statement itself is already Christian biased, right? So that is a good thing or a bad thing. It's just how it is, And why is Christmas a federal holiday? Separation, why is it a federal holiday? Right? Why are Sundays the USPS store closed or service closed, right? So there's questions to ask ourselves, and to kind of critique and go dig deeper into that question. But I think it's important. There was an interview that I read that came out of Harvard University, and there was a Muslim college student from Georgia. And she said, we as Muslims in America feel like second-class citizens, right? And so I think that's maybe part of also the psychology behind that student that you quoted statement of kind of like asserting within us, no, this is our place like anybody else. And two is want to make sure you know that as well.
All right. Adeel, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me. This has been great.
No, thank you so much. My pleasure.
This has been ReligionWise, a podcast produced by the Institute for Religious and Cultural Understanding of Muhlenberg College. ReligionWise is produced and directed by Christine Flicker. For more information about additional programming, or to make an inquiry about a speaking engagement, please visit our website at religionandculture.com. There, you'll find our contact information, links to other programming, and have the opportunity to support the work of the Institute. Please subscribe to ReligionWise wherever you get your podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.